Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Monday, September the 11th, 2023. You're listening to the Joseph Benamy Show. I am your host, Joseph Benamy. Thank you very much for sticking or joining us. I shouldn't say sticking with us. That's what I'm supposed to say after we have a commercial break. Anyway, back from the weekend, not a long weekend this weekend. We're now fully in the thick of September. And of course, today is the 22nd anniversary of the attacks in New York City on the Twin Towers, the Trade Center, New York Trade Center, and also the attack on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and we're not really sure where the other flight, there were 4 hijacked planes on that day, and we're not really sure where the 4th flight was supposed to attack. It appeared to be headed towards Washington, D.C., and would it have flown into the White House? That's the speculation, or the U.S. Capitol, or the Pentagon again. We just don't know. But the passengers on that plane fought back and brought the plane down in a field in rural Pennsylvania and turned out to be heroes. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But first, I want to talk a little bit tonight about, give you an update on what's happening here in Ottawa with the Freedom Convoy. The Freedom Convoy trial is continuing here in Ottawa, and there have been a number of very interesting developments. First of all, I know I said this before. I want to reiterate it because I think it's extremely important that people understand exactly what is going on here. First of all, there have been 16 days set aside for this trial. 16 days set aside for this trial. This is a trial of Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, who were 2 of the principal organizers around the Freedom Convoy. When was it? I guess it was January and February of last year, 2022. And they've been charged, both of them have been charged with, again, just wait for it, public mischief, counseling people to commit public mischief, intimidation. Those are the, obstructing police is another one, I guess. So, and I'm inserting the term public, by the way. It's not really public mischief, it's mischief. All right. Mischief is the kind of thing that, somebody urinates in a back alley, they trespass. I mean, it's a catch-all sort of thing for a very minor type of offense. Why the Crown, why the courts have set aside 16 days for this trial is astonishing. It's mind-boggling, ladies and gentlemen, that the courts would have set aside that long for a trial for alleged crimes that are so minor. I mean, people generally don't get charged with mischief. And if they do get charged with mischief, it's after a lot of persistent, the police have to come and tell people, you can't do this here, you can't do that there, on and on and on. So, you might have to call the police 10 times before you can get somebody who's being a nuisance outside of your corner store to get them charged with mischief. And what kind of a charge is mischief? Mischief is the kind of thing where they give you a ticket and you can contest the ticket, but, they don't arrest you and throw you in jail. And remember, Chris Barber and Tamara Lich were put in jail and held in jail for a significant period of time before they were finally allowed out on bail. Now, can you imagine being in jail awaiting trial for a charge of mischief? when normally the police would just issue you a ticket. Of course, you could go to court and you could dispute the validity of the charge, okay, rather than pay the tickets. Kind of like, think of it like a speeding ticket, okay? You get charged with speeding, you pay the fine, or you contest the fine. And that's the only time you go to jail. But these guys were held in prison for a period of time. And then when they were finally let out on bail with conditions attached, which again is unheard of in this kind of a thing in this country, now we have a 16-day trial. Now, that's the sort of the setup, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And I wanted to reiterate what the charges were because I wanted to emphasize how incredibly innocuous these charges are and how shocking it is that the court, at least initially, has set aside 16 days for the trial to be held. So, what is happening now? Well, what's happening now is that the judge is basically saying, well, we've got to organize this evidence. And the news reports are that the judge is trying to help the Crown organize and crystallize the evidence that they're presenting, which is, another way of saying that the Crown prosecutors weren't even ready for this trial properly, that they're not presenting the evidence in a way that is moving things along. And the judge now is expressing some very real concerns that if it continues to go this way, 16 days may not be enough. 16 days, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as I'm talking now, I'm asking myself, how long was the OJ trial? I don't know. I don't recall how long the OJ trial is. Maybe I'll look it up when we go for a break. But, it's murder trials don't last this long. It is such a travesty. And if you know me, ladies and gentlemen, there's an old saying that when you stand in the middle of the road, you're going to get hit from both sides. And that's kind of the way I feel sometimes, because although I'm a conservative, I hate to use the term a moderate conservative, but I'm more circumspect, more cautious than many of my conservative friends are when it comes to attributing behavior of the government and certain government officials to some sort of a conspiracy. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I try to see both sides of the argument. Every now and then I'll say, I can understand where they're coming from, even though I don't agree with what they're saying from my left-wing colleagues and friends out there. I don't agree with them, but I understand. And sometimes when they're disparaged in what I consider to be unhelpful terms, I'll defend them and say, no, they're not complete idiots. They're only partial idiots, that kind of thing. Another example, everybody who listens to this show knows that I'm not a huge Donald Trump fan. If I was American and I had to vote, I'd probably vote for him in the absence of an alternative. But I don't like Donald Trump's style. I think he does tremendous harm to the idea of what it means to be a leader. I think that our leaders have to conduct themselves with a certain amount of decorum, a certain amount of decency, and I think that Donald Trump, not only does he not do it, but he doesn't do that on purpose. And I think he's a very bad example for the youth of our country and for the youth of the United States. I get disparaged by many of my friends when I take that kind of a line with respect to policies, current events. Some of the politicians are out there. So when I say that there's something that smells terrible about the way this trial has already been conducted, and it's only really just started, this is the 5th day of the hearing of the trial. When I say that there is something fundamentally unreasonable, unjust about the Crown Prosecution Service bringing this kind of charge and pushing it so heavily. And here's the thing, and I'm glad that reporters from the Ottawa Citizen actually pointed this out in their ongoing live blogging from the trial, is that it's not even clear that the evidence that's being presented constitutes a crime. Forget about whether or not it constitutes public mischief or counseling people to commit mischief or intimidation. Set those questions aside from a legal definition point of view. The question is really, if I say, come to Ottawa to participate in this protest, it's really important. Am I committing a crime? Is this public? Is public mischief a real crime? The answer is no. It really isn't, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. But am I committing that crime by simply counseling people to come and participate in a protest? And again, let me again reiterate something that is completely lost in this whole discussion. Soon after truckers started to arrive in Ottawa, and it was a very spontaneous event, but soon afterward there was a court hearing, and the court hearing had to do with the honking. And there were people that were saying, come on, let us at least sleep at night. So there was a court hearing around this, and a judge basically ordered the truckers to not sound their horns from, I believe it was between 9 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock in the morning, or 10 to 8 or 10 to 9, but overnight. A completely reasonable request and a completely reasonable court order. But the flip side of that, ladies and gentlemen, is that the court had the opportunity to say that honking your horn as part of this protest is forbidden, period. They didn't, which means that the judge essentially took the position that that was perfectly legal. Inconvenient, to be sure, distressing for some people, there's no question about that, but that's the nature of protests. So the judge took that position, and the judge didn't just take that position from a theoretical point of view, that is to say, that's not just my interpretation of the court order, because that court order lasted for, I believe it was 30 days. It had to be renewed, and in the order renewing the original order, the judge made a statement to the effect, and I don't have it directly in front of me, but I've read it a few times, and the judge made a statement to the effect that as long as the protesters are following the conditions that have been set out in this order, that is to say, not honking their horns from such and such a time to such and such a time, that they were allowed to continue with the protest. So there is actually a court order confirming the legality of the protest, essentially, okay? They didn't say this is a legal protest explicitly like that, but they did refer to the protest so long as the protesters were following the guidelines set out in the order restricting the use of their horns overnight. And by the way, they did, okay? So long as the truckers that were there followed those conditions, as far as the judge was concerned, it was just another protest. They were allowed to continue their protest. So I don't know why I think that's a vitally important piece of information. I don't know why it's been sort of lost in the mix, if you will. But there it is. So circling back to what I was saying about my attitude towards these kinds of things, I'm more cautious, I'm more circumspect, I'm more reflective, okay? That is to say, I reflect on things a little bit more. I try to be more thoughtful, less incendiary, less inflammatory in the way that I describe things. So when I come to you now, ladies and gentlemen, when I come on the air, when I'm broadcasting on the internet, when you hear me say that there is something seriously wrong here, seriously askew, and it's bad and we need to stop it, that should carry a lot more weight than just simply, I'm angry and I'm spewing off because that's what I always do because I hate the government or I hate Justin Trudeau or any of those things. Because my approach to these things is to try to be thoughtful and to try to be fair and to try to see both sides of the argument. That doesn't mean that I agree, but that's the way I was raised. I was raised that you respect other people's opinion, even if you disagree with it, until it reaches a point in time where you have to actively disrespect it. And right now, that's where we are with this trial. That's where we are with the whole thing about this Freedom Convoy. We are at the point in time where moderate, thoughtful people like me are now standing up and saying, hold on, people. What's going on here is wrong and it has to stop. And I think I represent probably what I will call the silent majority. Let's use the term silent majority here, ladies and gentlemen. The silent majority that they just want to get on with their day-to-day lives. They don't necessarily like what's going on, but, they don't want to fight about it. Things are not bad enough to force them to take a stand. Well, that's changing now. That is absolutely changing, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to talk about that change and what it's doing in the polls here in Canada when we come back from our first break. So we have plenty more to talk about this evening. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. And we are back. Thank you so much for sticking with us. You are tuned into the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Monday, September the 11th, 2023. I'm your host, Joseph Ben-Ami, and we have been talking about the Tamara Lich, Chris Barber trial, also known as the Freedom Convoy criminal trial that is going on here in Ottawa as we speak. Today was day 5 of the trial, and the court has set aside 16 days for this trial. 16 days for a trial over mischief. 16 days for a trial over mischief, ladies and gentlemen. It's unprecedented, unheard of. And the judge today showed signs of being exasperated with the Crown. The Crown providing discovery on so-called evidence late, okay, which is problematic in and of itself. But just the meandering of the prosecution and the witnesses. And, you know, I asked this question last week, where is the crime? I'm still waiting to hear evidence about the crime because I haven't heard it yet. Are you telling me that asking people to participate in the protest constitutes mischief? I mean, the idea of mischief being this major crime that's got to be, we have to throw these people in jail and make an example of them. That is a dangerous, dangerous position to take, but it just seems that that's what the Crown here is intent on doing. And if they are, and if the court goes along with it, God help us all. This is a huge problem. Now, when I talk this way, as I was mentioning before the break, when I talk this way, because I'm kind of like, I hate the term moderate, but I'm a moderate conservative. I don't, you know, I'm not the kind of guy I'm not angry or anything like that, okay? There are a lot of conspiracies out there. Some of them may be valid, a lot of them aren't, but people are afraid. I'm not disparaging anybody for, you know, thinking what they think, worrying, because we live in a worrisome time. And we're constantly bombarded by information that, you know, maybe is not entirely accurate, but it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff right now, particularly when it comes to the speed at which information or misinformation gets spread around on the internet. You don't know, you know, this is why the motto of this show is, you know, don't drink the Kool-Aid. Don't drink anyone's Kool-Aid. I don't drink anyone's Kool-Aid. So when I take the position that I'm taking, that this is a dangerous precedent that the Crown is setting by prosecuting so intensively these individuals for such a minor crime that normally the police would just issue a ticket for, or a summons or whatever, okay? But these people were held in jail for a long time after they were arrested, and then they had onerous bail conditions that were placed on them. There was an attempt by the Crown to revoke Tamara Leach's bail because they alleged that she was breaking the conditions of her bail by talking about the Freedom Convoy, and I think she either traveled to Toronto to accept an award by given by I think it was the Constitution Foundation, or she appeared on a Zoom link, one or the other, okay? The fact that she did that, the Crown tried to argue was a violation of her terms of her bail, and they tried to have her bail revoked and put her back in prison. But remember what the underlying charge here is: not murder, not grand larceny, not whatever. The underlying charge, for which the Crown insisted that the bail be revoked, of course they didn't get their way, but for which the Crown insisted that the bail be revoked, is public mischief. It's incredible. And if the Crown goes through, and if the court agrees with this, I mean, I'm hopeful, given what I understand is the judge's growing exasperation with the Crown. I'm hopeful that she's going to see this for what it is, and not just throw the case out when the time comes, but throw it out with some very strong language, because that's what deserves to happen here. That's what deserves to be done. Now, getting back to my attitude, I said that to a certain degree, although I don't claim to be representative of any particular group, one might make the claim, I suppose, one might make the observation that my attitude is perhaps somewhat more strident than that silent majority. So I'm more likely than the silent majority to be unsilent, but I kind of veer towards the silent majority. I don't like the fighting. I don't want to have to go out, roll up my sleeves, put on the boxing gloves, so to speak. I spent years in the political ring. I don't want to spend any more time in the political ring. I'm still involved in politics, and but it's a young man's sport, okay? I don't want to punch people. I don't want to be punched. Call me the trainer. I'm happy being a trainer. I'll stand in the corner. I'll give you some advice. I'll help you train. But I'm not fit to be in the ring anymore. It's a young person's game. But what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's indicative of a guy like me who's using such strong language when I talk about really what is an attempt to corrupt the justice system that is going on right now here in Ottawa around this trial. When I use that kind of language, it's a pretty good indication that the people in that silent majority are starting to wake up. And when I say they're starting to wake up, it's starting to show in the polls. The federal poll, latest poll federally, let me back up a second, okay? I like to use this website, 338canada.com. 338canada.com is they monitor, they don't do their own polling. What they do is they monitor all of the different polls that are being taken across the country, and then they make them public, they present them, or they aggregate the polls as well. So the latest poll aggregation that's been done by 338 Canada of the federal standings of political parties is the Conservatives are sitting at 38% and the Liberals are down to 28%. The NDP is sitting in third place at 18%. Now, I know some of you out there want to know what the People's Party of Canada, where they're sitting. And the People's Party of Canada, ladies and gentlemen, is sitting at 5% right now. And this is an aggregation of all of the latest polls. I don't know about Pierre Poilievre. I know Pierre Poilievre personally. I don't have anything negative to say about him. I think he has the makings of a very good, solid prime minister. Does he have the kind of charisma that you would usually expect for somebody who's potentially going to run away with things, to run the table on the opposition parties or on their political opponents? I don't know. I'm not entirely sure that he fits into that category. But he's doing really well in the polls right now, and the party under his leadership is doing really well in the polls. Is that a sign? I think it is. I think it's a sign that middle of the road, moderate Canadian, the silent majority, are finally waking up. And the Liberal Party, under Justin Trudeau, they're asleep at the switch. And here's me demonstrating how I give people the benefit of the doubt. When it comes to the Liberals, they have a real problem. Their real problem is, not that they're bad people. It's not that they want to screw you. It's not that they don't care about the country. On the contrary, their problem is that they care too much about the wrong things. They care too much about things that aren't real, like the so-called climate emergency. But their heart is in the right place to the extent that they honestly believe that they have to take the actions that they take in order to help save the planet. And you're not going to get them off of that. You're not going to convince them not to take that action because they are true believers. That's what makes them, frankly, so dangerous. They believe that what they're doing is critical to the future of this country and to the future of humanity, period. I think they're way off base with that, but I give them credit for standing on principle even when the principle is wrong. That's where people are going to criticize me. But I bring this to your attention, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the problem that the Liberals have. They don't understand that the issues that Canadians care about, the problems that Canadians care about, the cost of living problem, the inflation problem, all of these things, okay, affordability in housing, lack of housing, shortage of housing, all of these things, ladies and gentlemen, come back to the policies that have been adopted and implemented by the Liberal government. All of them. When you talk about inflation, when you talk about the cost of food rising, you can look. You don't have to look any further than the cost of farmers producing that food and the cost of shipping that food to the market, which has increased exponentially. And that's all because of anti-climate change regulation and taxes, particularly the carbon tax. And the carbon tax, of course, has raised prices right across the board. So this is really, when you talk about inflation, these are the causes of inflation. When you talk about the housing crisis could be solved tomorrow if we would cut to a reasonable level based on our capacity for building new housing, if we would reduce the number of people that we're bringing into the country every year. I don't care how many people we bring in. I don't have any problem with immigrants so long as, they come to this country and they have a desire to settle and help to build the country and be good Canadian citizens. As far as I'm concerned, numbers mean nothing to me. But if you're going to bring in 1 million new immigrants a year, which is what we're talking about targeting now, that is a humongous number of new immigrants, new Canadians, on top of refugees, on top of temporary workers, on top of foreign students. So, we might be looking at 1.5 million to 2 million people that we're bringing into this country every year. We are not building enough housing for these people. And so either we find a way to accelerate our capacity to build housing, we increase our capacity to build housing, we accelerate our housing construction. Either we do that, or we reduce the number of people, thereby reducing the demand on that housing. It's not rocket science, ladies and gentlemen. So if you combine the immigration policies of the federal Liberal Party, and you combine that with its anti-climate change policies, it's a recipe for disaster. Nobody should be surprised by what's going on in this country, and nobody should be willing to accept the explanation that, well, it's inflation. Inflation. It's one of those mysterious esoterical things when it comes to money. It has to do with money supply and all this stuff. Okay, yeah, that can be very important when it comes to inflation. But I strongly suspect, my argument is that the inflation problem that we're having right now in this country is 100% due to the policies that this government has implemented. And I'm not talking its monetary or fiscal policies. Just those two areas: anti-climate change policy and immigration policy. Now, there is no chance of the Liberal Party changing its course on those issues because they believe that they have to be doing what they're doing on climate change, and we have to have relatively open borders when it comes to allowing people to come and settle in Canada. We may not have a border crisis like they have in the United States, but we have what is essentially under government mandate, an open border. It's orderly, don't get me wrong. We don't have people crashing the gates. Yes, we have refugees, but not the same thing that they're experiencing down south of our border. We've gone way over time here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have to take our second break. So stick with us. We'll be back. We have more to go here on the Joseph Benamy Show. Don't go away. And we are back. Thank you for staying with us. You are tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show for Monday, September the 11th, 2023. You know, one of the aftermath, part of the aftermath, if you will, of 9/11. Today, of course, is the 22nd anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center in downtown Manhattan in New York City. And one of the legacies, if you will, of that is the growth of our domestic security services, the acquiescence, if you will, that we have all participated in when it comes to national security and, protecting us. So I say this because I'm curious. I don't really have an answer to this. I don't really know what the correct position is. I'm deliberating. I'm contemplating. I'm wondering how much of what we're seeing today in terms of overreach of government, in terms of the government trying to force its views, the governing party using the apparatus of government as a blunt instrument to force people to acquiesce in what they believe is the right thing to do, rather than letting people basically exercise their own freedoms, their own good judgment. And, it's kind of hypocritical when you think about it, because, these guys, especially people who come from more of the liberal side of things, and I hate the term liberal because there's nothing liberal about an ideological liberal. They are amongst the most illiberal people I know. But giving people the benefit of the doubt, okay, when I talk about people on the liberal side of things, they have a lot of faith in human beings. They're constantly talking about how much they care about people. They care. They want, it's kumbaya. Until you want to just exercise your own judgment, in which case, oh, no way. This is going to be an ongoing issue. This is going to be an issue coming up because we're seeing more and more of the return of mask mandates. Now, I'm skeptical. I know many of my friends are saying the government's going to impose a mask mandate. Just wait for it. If you'd asked me this, before the whole COVID thing started, I would have said, yeah, that's just not going to happen. Of course, the COVID thing demonstrated how wrong I was. The government did step in and take incredible draconian measures, not just with respect to the masks, but also with the vaccines, and then the orders to keep people at home. I guess they just don't trust people. So when my friends say that there's a government mask mandate coming, I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm a lot more circumspect in my position than I would have been a few years ago, that's for sure. And if it does happen, I got to tell you, I'm going to have a lot of trouble with it. I've said this in the past, in the previous mask mandates, I go, I believe in lawful authority. We have a government, the alternative to having a government that we work with and that we obey the lawful authority, the alternative to that is anarchy, and anarchy is not good for anybody. I'm not going to take that position so easily this time around, because I think that the evidence here is clear that the mask mandates are really irrelevant. I don't want to get into a technical argument about the efficiency of wearing a mask, okay? I'm just saying that I don't see the need for the masks. Jill Biden has COVID, apparently. She's going to be fine. How many times did our prime minister and members of the prime minister's family come down with COVID? They were fine. I'm not saying COVID doesn't exist. I'm not saying COVID is a conspiracy. I'm saying that you catch it. It's a virus. You are ill for a few days, and that's it. All of this talk about long-term COVID and all this stuff, I don't know, guys. I can't tell you whether it's true or not because I just don't know what to believe anymore. Anyway, I was saying, what is the legacy of 9/11? And I think that the legacy of 9/11 isn't the Afghan war so much, and it isn't so much the Iraq war. Those were issues. They are ongoing issues. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dismissing them. But I think that for those of us who live in this part of the world, the real legacy is the growth of big brother government. And to a very large degree, the acquiescence, our surrendering to Big Brother government, our acceptance of it, because the government, Big Brother, grew up and started to take charge, partly because of the events of that day, and we didn't want that to happen again. So there was some justification, but we've become too comfortable with it, my friends. And now we do have people who are going to use our fear in order to help to buttress their political positions. You know, the Prime Minister's reaction to the Freedom Convoy here in Ottawa in 2022, I think, is a perfect example of that. When people were starting to talk about coming to Ottawa, and during the protest, the Prime Minister and people around the Prime Minister continued to disparage participants, to vilify them, to describe them as extremists, of ne'er-do-wells, of racists, of anti-Semites. That was the characterization. Now, I don't believe that Justin Trudeau... Okay, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, because I want to say that Justin Trudeau, you know, you want to give a man the benefit of the doubt, but it's impossible for me to believe that he actually thought this. I mean, it has to be a perfect example, a perfect textbook example of self-deception. He believed it because he wanted to believe it was true. And he never took the time to examine any kind of evidence to determine whether or not his preconceived notions were in fact accurate, whether they actually comported to reality. If he had taken that time, he would have realized that the convoy, the Freedom Convoy, was not at all a violent protest. Do you know what we have to start calling it? We have to start calling it the Bouncy Castle protest. Remember that this protest, it was like a carnival. Now, you can throw stones at the people who organized it, and you could say, well, you know, you should not have done that. You blocked up a number of streets for a period of time. You caused me to lose sleep. So maybe there's some argument there. But violent? Come on. There was no violence. The only violence was when the police actually moved in to remove the protesters. That was the only violence that there was. And even then, it was pretty low-key. No water cannons. Of course, dead of winter here in Ottawa. You know, it still is cold, so you're not going to use water cannons on people. But I don't even think we have water cannons in the police arsenal here. So, the Bouncy Castle protest. It was the Bouncy Castle protest. And literally, ladies and gentlemen, because some of the organizers wanted to set up some stuff for kids to have fun and that, so they put together a bouncy castle. And there was barbecuing, and there was all kinds of stuff. So if Justin Trudeau had just attended, he would have seen this. He may not have agreed with it. He might have said, you know, guys, you can't do this without a permit. And you can't just block these streets. And you know what? People in Ottawa here, they don't need the horns blasting at 8 o'clock at night, even if you have a court order that says you can do it. But he would have seen, even if he disagreed with what they stood for, even if he disagreed with what they were doing, he would have seen that his characterization and characterizations of this group of individuals, this group of citizens, was 180 degrees wrong. 180 degrees wrong. But he never took the time to do that. And so he was stuck in his image. And then he talked about this, and then all of a sudden, that was what was being reported. And of course, the laziness of the mainstream media, that didn't send reporters to Ottawa. All they did was just regurgitate what was coming out of the Prime Minister's office on press releases. And then, of course, once a few of the newspapers started to use that characterization, because official Ottawa, they must know, so they were reporting the same thing. And then you get the second and third and fourth levels of the mainstream media that don't look into things at all. All they do is they report what other people are reporting in their own words, if not plagiarizing outright. So is it any wonder when people here, even in Ottawa, were bombarded with this false narrative, is it any wonder that they actually believed it? Is it any wonder that people were afraid of these guys? You know, there's a logical explanation why people felt intimidated. They felt intimidated because they were being told by the people who should have known better, that is to say, our government representatives, who should have known better. They were being told constantly that the protesters were dangerous, extremists, racists, etc., etc., etc. Pick your poison. I'm still hearing from people here, even my neighbors, who refer to it in the protest in negative terms. Anyway, look, I think that this is, again, I think this is part of the 9/11 legacy. And I don't know what the answer to this is, because I see us on a slope, a downward slope, the slippery slope. I know people say, well, that's not a real thing. I'm telling you, the slippery slope is a real thing. And I don't think we're out of control yet. I think that we can reverse the trend, but it's going to take now some real courage on the part of elected officials. And I think we're seeing that now somewhat here in Canada anyway, where governments are, for instance, they're starting to push back officially when it comes to some of the wokeism and the trans stuff that's going on in our schools. It's not just school boards that are pushing back. It's actually elected governments. It's a start, and we need to support that kind of thing. But there's so much to do, my friends. There's so much to do, and we must be vigilant. And when the government comes now and says mask mandate, if they do that, even before they do it, it's probably not a bad idea to start getting on the phone to your local representatives and say, listen, no mask mandate, okay? Because whether we win or lose on the mask mandate argument, we have to make our voices heard. Because if we just roll over and play dead when it comes to the mask mandate, then the next thing is going to be vaccine passports again, and then the next thing again is going to be lockdowns. You have to draw the line. And I think that the mask thing is going to be it. Again, I'm not predicting that the government is going to enforce some sort of a mandate or declare some sort of a mandate. Okay, I'm not predicting that. I'm skeptical about claims that the government is going to do that, any prediction along those lines. But I could be wrong. I could be dead wrong about it. And so I'm concerned. I wasn't concerned when the COVID thing started and the masks were being talked about and when they were talking about a vaccine passport. I would never have believed in my country that we would be imposing a vaccine passport system. I never would have believed it. Some of my friends, they thought that this was coming. They warned me. I didn't listen. So I'm not saying it's coming back. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I doubt that it's coming back, but I was wrong before. I could be wrong now. And so I'm much more circumspect about that prediction. And again, as I say, I think this is part of the legacy. I think that on a day like today, the 22nd anniversary of the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City, it behooves us to pause and to remember the events of that day, to remember the victims, to remember the incredible heroism of first responders in New York to charge into those buildings to save lives, who gave the ultimate sacrifice. It behooves us to remember them and to honor their memory. But at the same time, I believe that we need to also think a little bit, reflect on the legacy, and to ask ourselves some hard questions about what has happened to our society in the aftermath of 9/11. And are we happy with it? Objectively, just take a few steps back, to contemplate a little bit, to reflect. Are we happy with what our society has become in the aftermath of 9/11? And have we gone too far? Have our governments gone too far? And what can we do now to arrest and even reverse that trend? I think that 22 years after the event, that the time has come for us to start asking those questions. They're not easy questions to answer. We don't like to look in the mirror and say, I don't like what I'm seeing. But I think that we have to. Remember, we're a free society. And as Ronald Reagan once pointed out, and not just Ronald Reagan, but he said it famously, freedom is not free. It takes vigilance. Vigilance doesn't mean taking up arms and fighting against tyranny. Vigilance means paying attention to what's going on and recognizing when we're straying off of the freedom path and taking corrective action when the corrective action isn't really that profound. I think that that's an entirely appropriate thing for us to reflect on this 22nd anniversary of the attack on the World Trade Center in New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, another hour has passed. Don't forget to check out the website, www.josephbenamy.com. When you're there, feel free to send me an email, send your comments, your thoughts about what I'm talking about here today. I read all my emails, and I try to respond to as many as I can. Just use the contact form right there on the website. While you're there, also, don't forget to sign up for our free email updates. Absolutely free. We do not share your information with anybody. And I think I mentioned this the other day, and I should really probably post this information also somewhere on the website and what have you. Follow me on Twitter. @Joseph Benamy, all one word, without the hyphen. That's my handle, @Joseph Benamy. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end again of our time together today. I won't say that I hope you enjoyed it, but I hope that you found it informative, and I hope that I've given you some things to think about, and perhaps motivated you to, take some action. You don't have to be marching in the streets, but pay attention to what's going on around you, because that is so critically important to the maintenance of the society that we have and that we love and we want to pass on to our children. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you tomorrow night. God bless, and remember, whatever you do, do not drink the Kool-Aid.